Father Lynch was still as strong as ever. They blamed him for creating a bad atmosphere at the school, which they said had continued long after he had left. The teachers tried to get the Archdiocese of New York to come in and clean up the school. But despite 3 meetings with bishops, the Archdiocese took no action.
We received a telephone call from another assistant district attorney in the office who had been contacted by a childhood friend who was a teacher at the Mount St. Michael Academy, and he had done, up to that point, some pretty extensive work involving allegations of what he considered improprieties at that particular institution. Having exhausted, to the best of my recollection, what he felt was his recourse with the particular church authorities, he was advised to then handle it with the various lay authorities.
Joe Pagnosi called me and described the situation.
And what did you then do about it?
Well, naturally, based on his allegations, there was an area of concern, and we felt there was something that we should look into. So I called the district attorney, who was Mario Morola, and told him what I was told. And we went over it in length, and then we felt that the appropriate thing would be to have someone from our sex crimes unit investigate the allegations.
What were the allegations?
The allegations that Joe told me was that there was widespread homosexual activity at the school that had extended to the abuse of some of the students there, and that some of the students had been physically abused, but at this point were intimidated and were afraid to come forward. Although in Mr. Pagnosi's opinion, some serious crimes had been committed. Joe Pagnosi told me initially that there was some very hard feelings at the school, and in fact that there had been some student groups that had mobilized, and the situation was getting very untenable at the school, that the educational aspect of the school had declined because students had no longer had any faith in the educational staff, and most of it was religious staff at that point.
On June 30th, 1987, a crucial meeting was held at the district attorney's offices in the Bronx Supreme Court. The meeting was called by prosecutors Mary Ann Jennings and Mitch Garber. They had decided to involve the FBI and New York Police Department Joint Task Force on Child Sex Abuse. The task force was headed by Special Agent Alan MacDonald, a staunch and righteous Catholic, Vietnam War hero and specialist in child sex abuse. Also present at the meeting was Special Agent Jim Clemente, FBI, and Detective Joe Gelfand, NYPD.
We preliminarily interviewed the teachers, reviewed certain of the documents that they had prepared over a period of time, brought the matter to Mr. Morola's attention, and he authorized us to move forward and to begin to look into the nature of the allegations. They raised allegations that had implications both in the educational context as well as arguably in a criminal context.
The 3 teachers complained about Father Lynch in that general educational context. His name was not connected in their minds with any possible child sex abuse, according to Mitch Garber.
So there wasn't an allegation from them about him at that time?
Not at the beginning, no. Not from the teachers at all, ever, in fact.
When the charges, when the allegations generally of sexual misconduct were first brought, they were not focused on Father Lynch generally, but they talked about Mount St. Michael's in particular. It wasn't until Father Lynch was focused on by the church itself and by the Archdiocese that Father Lynch's name began to come up. As a matter of fact, the FBI was the first to bring up Father Lynch's name. It was not brought up by any of the people they interviewed. So they targeted him. Why did they target him? I think because he was a political man.
3 weeks into the investigation, on July 24th, the FBI interviewed John Schaefer, who was ultimately to be Father Lynch's accuser.
We were able to learn that the way Schaefer was uncovered was through a very difficult in the sense of hard-nosed probe by the New York City Police Department, assisted by the FBI. They went to the school with a presumption, a theory, that the school was a hotbed of homosexuality. That comes across in conversations with them and in their notes. The FBI and the police went to students at the school who had been questioned, and they uncovered one student in particular, and he told me he was very frightened by the FBI questioning of him, and he said, I don't know anything about what's going on, if anything's going on, but perhaps, maybe, you could find out something interesting from this fellow Schaefer. He's a little bit of an oddball. He has no friends. He hangs out with the brothers. He only seems to relate to adult men, said this boy. Maybe he can tell you something. There were rumors about him. So he was found by way of an investigation based on rumor, based on speculation, and that led the police to Schaefer.
4 years after the incident, Schaefer now lives with a gay lover and is a professional actor.
What happened was I had gotten an opportunity to go away for a summer to do theater, and I came home and my grandfather said there were FBI agents there to see you, and I didn't know what that meant, and so they said they would come back the next day, and he said there were two, but the next day only one came back, and it was Al McDonald.
And indeed, as the FBI witness acknowledged the trial, their questioning of him was not in conformity with FBI rules. It was very informal, and it was clearly calculated to draw him out in a way that was not necessarily truthful.
And he showed me his credentials, and he said, "Would you get in the car? I'd like to talk to you." We get in the car, and this was on City Island, and we drove to the end of the island. And he started asking me questions of what it was like going to Mount St. Michael, and I wasn't sure what this was leading to, and he started to explain that they were doing an investigation of alleged sexual misconduct throughout the school.
He was exploited in the sense that the FBI agents pretended to be his friends, his buddies, and played up to him and played up to his ego in order for them to put him on the stand.
He brought up like a couple of yearbooks, and he asked me to go through yearbooks and see if I remembered anybody in those yearbooks who I might remember anything happening. And that's when I brought up Father Lynch. And one of the major reason I brought it up was when you're confronted with somebody who you've never met before, there's not so much a barrier there. It's not like you can't say something to this person. I viewed it as an opportunity to vent something that had been around for a year and a half, or that I had not said. And so I just let it all go, and I just spewed forth all this information, and it was really a chance for me to vent my spleen. That's horrible, but to just talk things out, and it seems that was the start of how everything happened.
The ultimate test, I think, of how fair an investigation is came from John Schaefer's own words on the stand. John Schaefer ultimately, and reluctantly, but ultimately testified that when the FBI contacted him, they had already targeted Father Lynch, when indeed they had no evidence against Father Lynch whatsoever. They said to young Schaefer, "We already have approximately a dozen lads who are willing to give evidence against Father Lynch." That was absolutely untrue. There was never anyone other than Schaefer ultimately who would give evidence against Father Lynch. They said to him that all you have to do is tell us now something dirty about Father Lynch, and then you'll only have to go to grand jury and give your evidence there, and the case will never go to trial because he'll undoubtedly plead guilty or he'll run away and never face these charges.
Definitely the distinct impression I got was that undoubtedly other kids would come forward and talk about it. It had been alleged that they were talking to other kids in specific reference to Father Lynch. And I really had the impression that other kids would come forward, and especially when we got up to that week right before the trial, and I was just going through everything, and I decided I didn't want to testify. I look at that, and it makes me understood that maybe it was very easy to talk to him, but maybe I was only half listening just because of just the nature of everything that I was going through.
In the middle of August 1987, the investigation ground to a halt. Assistant District Attorney Phil Folia had maintained an interest in the case and had been following progress.
Apparently, some of the witnesses that Mr. Pagnosi had originally thought he could produce, he could not produce. There were students who he told us about who either were dissuaded from coming forward by their parents or for other reasons did not materialize. And the case was not as strong as Mr. Pagnosi had first led us to believe it would be. There was also a problem with the credibility of the witness, one or two witnesses that did come forward and talk to our sex crimes unit. There were severe credibility problems, as well as their inability to articulate what exactly occurred, on what dates they occurred, etc. And that always makes a sex crimes case difficult. Mr. Merola was concerned about the case because it was one with very serious implications. And when it was reported back to him what the evidence was, he was concerned as to whether or not that would sustain a criminal charge against the people who were named. Our office had just been through a very highly celebrated sex crimes case, the Proctor daycare scandal. And we realized the intricacies of a sex crime case and also the impact on the potential defendants. And we wanted to make sure, obviously, that if there was a case to be brought, that it was brought on very solid ground, because it's too easy to smear someone's reputation.
The old district attorney who was first asked to bring these charges, that's Mario Merola, he declined to touch the case. He says, there's no corroboration here, there's no basis for these charges other than the uncorroborated word of the young man, and that's not enough to bring a case.
But Mario Merola died suddenly in office of a stroke at the age of 65 on October 27, 1987. Paul Gentile, Merola's deputy, was appointed to finish Merola's term of office. Gentile was an altogether different type of district attorney.
Paul Gentile was a district attorney who was desperate to be elected. He'd been appointed after the death of the man who was the district attorney at the time. He was his first assistant. The appointment was for a year, and he had to run in an election that year. He'd been appointed by the governor solely on the basis of his being the chief assistant, and he was desperate for publicity. He was a man who was, I would say, interested first and foremost in Mr. Paul Gentile and his re-election.
Shortly after taking over as DA, Paul Gentile decided to reactivate the case and bring the evidence to a grand jury.
Well, Chief Judge Wachtler, he's the chief judge of the entire state, has once indicated that a grand jury may very well indict a ham sandwich at the behest of the district attorney. In Bronx County, we'd like to use a pastrami sandwich rather than a ham sandwich.
After a period of time in which it became clear that the potential targets of those allegations had chosen not to testify before the grand jury, a vote was taken of the grand jurors, which is 23 citizens, and Father Lynch and another individual associated with Mount St. Michael were charged with crimes.
Father Lynch was on holiday in Ireland at the time the charges were announced by the district attorney's office on Friday the 13th, May 1988.
When they initially held a press conference, they came out with some of the most outlandish lies in the world. They said, for example, that Father Lynch was a fugitive. They said that there were several charges of allegations and impropriety supported by several young men, all of which they knew to be false. So they immediately poisoned the well of justice by making these false statements, and then pulled back and try to hide and cause Father Lynch and his supporters to be vilified the way they did.
I remember I was praying to St. Martin when Larry came in, and a Cork Examiner had some headline like AIDS priest Father Lynch on 3 sex charges or something. And my stomach, I just grabbed my stomach like, and I was holding it, and I had been kneeling by my bed, and I now backed from the bed, and I just went down on the ground and into a complete fetal position and just cried. You know, oh God, no, it's too much. I cannot take it.
Father Lynch is a member of the